Music and art tell a story, and storytelling is such a great way to learn and share how we're feeling and, process what we're learning. So before lunch, we had Trisha, Rose, and Kim, who all talked about how we're going to work differently in our planning work going forward and supporting people to create a plan that they want for their own life. Then we heard from Randy, Lita, and Jane about facilities closing and living where people want to live and making choices. And now I'm going to talk a bit about some changes that we're going to be making around financial processes and funding for DSP participants. It's really about individualized funding. And for many of us, this is a new way of doing things. So we're going to have a few minutes afterwards to talk at your tables to see if you have any questions. And I have a couple of people who are going to help me, and they're going to tell their stories. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Charles McConville. Charles is going to be joining us from Pictou. And if you were here last at the last conference, I'm sure you'll remember Charles from the panel presentations. He really hit it out of the park last year. Charles is from Hamilton, Ontario, where he grew up in foster care. When he was 20 years old, he was placed in Riverview here in Pictou County. Over the past years, Charles has worked very hard to achieve independent living. He now lives on his own and works at Summer Street Industries. He's also a member of People First Nova Scotia Pictou chapter, and he also sits on 2 committees. We also have Stephanie Carver joining us from Middleton. Stephanie is the current president of Inclusion Nova Scotia and the proud mother of 3 young men in their 20s, the youngest of whom, Peter, has helped her learn so much about the importance of advocacy, human rights, and the values of inclusion. As Peter's family looks ahead to his future after leaving school, they imagine a life for him where he has the supports he needs and deserves to live fully included in community. So first, I'm going to explain a bit about what individualized funding means and how it's going to work, and then I'll turn it over to Charles and Stephanie to sort of talk about how it impacts them in their life as a person with a disability and a family member. Yes. So I've talked about who's going to be speaking. So let's get right into individualized funding. So we'll talk a bit about how funding works today for people in DSP. And we have sort of 2 streams of funding. We have what we call residential funding, and that's funding for people that live, it could be in a small option home, it could be in a group home, it could be in a larger institution. And the way it works is that the funding is provided to the service provider, and the services are mostly determined by the service provider. So we would fund the bed, not necessarily the individual. So for example, if the individual leaves today, the way it works, if they were to leave a small option home, the funding continues to stay in the home and doesn't move with the individual. And so you can see where that might not be the best way for it to work. But individualized funding, and we do have a few individualized funding programs today. So for example, Independent Living Support or ILS and Flex are individualized. The future state will be even more individualized, let's say. Under the remedy, everybody in DSP will be receiving individualized funding. But under individualized funding, the funding is based on the individual support needs. So those with higher needs receive higher levels of funding, and those with lower disability-related support needs get lower levels of funding. Today, there is some ability to identify the supports and services that you need in ILS and Flex and access them from multiple providers, but we want to be able to do that even more so in the future. And there are some options to self-manage, which is basically to run your own funding and pay your own bills. But in the future, this is how it's going to work. As I said, the remedy requires that all participants in DSP by the end of the remedy are receiving individualized funding. And the reason is it provides greater choice, flexibility, and control to have a good life in community. Because we have a lot of rules in the programs that we have today. And so that sometimes limits what people can do with their funding. And so we want to give people as many options as possible. And that's what individualized funding can do. So how it's going to work is you're going to start by meeting with your LAC or your IPSC or let's say your support person in DSP and have a conversation about how you want to live your life, what's important to you, what your goals are, and develop a bit of a plan based on that. Then there would be an assessment if it looks like maybe you need some funding to be able to activate that plan. So they would do an assessment which would identify your level of funding. You would develop a budget based on that to implement your plan, and then you could purchase your supports and services from service providers. But it really starts with, it doesn't really start with money right away. It starts with what's important to you. What are your goals? How do you want to live your life? And then we can look at what funding you might need to support your disability related support needs. So I like this because this really gives you an idea of all the choices that you can use your individualized funding for. So with individualized funding, you could choose to live on your own. You could choose to live with family or friends. You could choose to live in a home with another DSP participant, or maybe with a community member who's paid to provide support. That would be home sharing. Or maybe there's an option here we haven't even thought of yet. The point is all options are on the table. You can use your individualized funding for just about any sort of living arrangement that you choose. And in terms of where you live, you could use your funding to live in your own home that you own, or you might choose to rent a home or an apartment, or you might live in a home that's owned by a service provider, like today, a small option home. All of those options are on the table. And in terms of managing your funding, and I know this is one that makes people nervous. And we're not doing this so that we're not trying to download and say you have to manage all your own funding. That's one option. You can self-manage, but that is a lot for many people. But you could ask a service provider to manage your funding for you, or you could use what we call the administrative backbone. That's a service that we are going to be providing, that this is somebody who helps you manage your funding. So again, all those options are on the table. And the supports that you need, you get to choose. Do you want supports that come to your home and visit? You might want some supports that are outside of the home, or you might have some supports that live in the home with you, which could be like a home share. This is just to give you an idea of all the possibilities that are available through individualized funding. So what's included in individualized funding? So there's really three buckets. I'll start with the middle one, which is the basics, which is what we have today. So there's some funding for things like food, shelter, and transportation. So that amount isn't determined by your level of support. That's just the same for everybody, and those are the basics in life. And then the big chunk of funding is supports funding, could be for direct support hours, for day programming, and costs associated with community inclusion. So that's probably the largest amount of funding, and that's based on your level of support. It's based on the types of disability-related supports you might need for your activities of daily living. And then there's also special needs, which are those specific disability-related support needs that wouldn't be covered by the basics. So that could be things like a special diet or specific pieces of equipment or therapies and things like that. So that's what's included in each person's individualized funding. How can the funding be spent? So this is funding for disability-related support needs. So these are the categories. So as I said, daily living support staff, you can use your individualized funding for that. You can use it to engage in your community life, to be part of what's happening in your community. Continuing education. There is funding for administration. I just talked about that. So you can either purchase some support for managing your money, or you can access it through a service provider. Medical supports, and we do have a category of other, because it's possible that we haven't thought of everything. And so there is another category, and if we haven't thought of everything, if it's part of your plan and it's approved by the eligibility funding and assessment coordinator, there is an option for that, because we know that we don't know everything. And so we're rolling this out, and we're going to learn as we go along, even though this is based on what is pretty common in other places in terms of individualized funding. But those are really the types of things one would spend their individualized funding on. So a couple of common questions. What does this mean for me? When will I be able to access individualized funding? So under the remedy, the priority is for those who are on the service request list or the wait list, not receiving any support from DSP, and those in institutional settings. So over the next 3 years, everybody will eventually move to individualized funding. But in the next year or so, we need to prioritize those two groups because of the discrimination. So we need to focus on those groups for receiving individualized funding. But like I said, over the next 3 years, all participants will gradually have access to individualized funding. So if you're currently in DSP, you'll continue to work with your care coordinator until an LAC, a local area coordinator, or an IPSC are assigned to you to begin planning with you. And that will be when you develop that plan and then access individualized funding. So some people have to wait a little bit. And that's the reason you heard the announcement from the minister that we are increasing rates in the short term to even help those individuals with increased supports in the short term till you access individualized funding. So eventually everybody will. I just want you to know that. For DFSC families, nothing is changing as this is already an individualized funding program, but we are reviewing our children's program. And so we are going to be making changes over the next few years, and that work has started already. And just that this is the initial rollout. We're going to continue to provide you with more information and updates as the remedy's implemented, and we're looking forward to it. I think that's it. That is it. So that's just a quick overview of individualized funding. I'm going to turn it over to Charles now, and he can talk to you a bit about what it means to him. He's using individualized funding through DSP, and he's going to share a bit about his experience, what it means to him to manage his own money and live in a way that works for him. So Charles, I'll turn it over to you in Pictou.
Okay. I'm Charles. I'm president of the Pictou County chapter with PFNS. I am talking about individualized, and let me try that again. I am talking about individualized funding and why it is important to all us to have some control over our money. I like having control over my money and where it goes. I use my money for basic needs such as rent, power, groceries, cigarettes, and ordering meals with my friends. I like having more say in who will be managing my staffing money when I have staff. I want more choice on who my staff will be. I want to help interview staff who would be working with me. And I actually brought this up to our PC with Metro Community Living, and she thought it was a great idea. This is actually happening now, thanks to me advocating for myself when they work with me. I want more flexibility, so if I do not need a staff and want them on another day, we can arrange this change. I also want more flexibility on what we are spending our staff hours doing. I want staff that can work around my work and people first schedules without losing staff hours. I have more say when if I have more say in when my staff work with me. I do not want to lose shifts during the week because the service provider needs them in their programs. The service provider will need to have other staff to pull in for those changes. There are times when my staff schedule changes and I may lose my staff that day. I understand that this can happen, but it's frustrating all the same. If there are upcoming expenses or activities that I want to be involved, such as a trip, a conference, a social event, like a hockey game. I want to be able to change my budget to cover those costs. I have control over deciding my work and what I want to do. But in the past, service providers made some of those decisions for me. For instance, when I lived in a group home, the service provider asked me if I wanted to go to the local vocational center. I did not know if I had the right to say no, and I ended up going to the program. I made $3 an hour and worked 9 to 3. I did not make much money. After a couple of years, the vocational center offered me some training and part-time work doing catering, lawn care, and work projects for seniors. This work was minimum wage. I liked a lot of this work. I really liked catering because I get to serve people, chat with them, and get positive feedback on my work from the staff. I continue this part-time today and really enjoy it. In the past, I was told by staff that I could not use my transportation money for people first work. I found out later that I decide how my transportation money is spent, not the staff. For years, staff would tell me what I could and not. In the past, staff would tell me what I could and could not spend my money on when I was in the group home and also in independent living program. For instance, in the group home, they limited and used to control when and how much money I spent on cigarettes. Now I decide when and how many packages of cigarettes I buy. Our members want more control over their money so they can do more activities they want to do instead of the service provider making those decisions for me. I would like to add one more thing. Me and my service provider were talking last Friday, like with them pulling my staff from me if someone calls in sick at the group home. She confirmed with me that going forward, staff for the group home are going to be strictly for the group home, and staff for ILS are going to strictly be for ILS. They're going to try to change it so they're not mixing kind of thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles. I love your tie. You look fantastic. And thank you for sharing your experiences about managing your own money, because I know it can be a scary thought for many people. So I think it was great to hear about what it means to you and the decisions you've been able to make on your own. And I think it's going to make some people feel better and feel like they can do it as well. Next, we're going to hear from Stephanie Carver. Stephanie, over to you to share a bit about your experience and how individualized funding will make a difference to your son, Peter, and your family.
Thanks a lot, Maria. See if the tech is going to work there. So, hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Carver. These are my 3 amazing sons who are all in their 20s. I'm going to go back there. So my oldest, Michael, is 28. He lives in Halifax with his partner. My middle son, Chris, is my wild board boy. He snowboards skateboarder and surfboarder. He's out in Revelstoke, BC. He's 25. And my youngest son, Peter, is 22. And he's the one who brings me to this work and to you here today. I'm also a very recently retired educator. I worked in the school system in Halifax for 32 years, and I'm a board member of Inclusion Nova Scotia, which I'll talk to you about in a second, and I've been president since 2019. My introduction to inclusion as being different from disability rights advocacy came later in life. I was a kick-butt disability advocate for a long time and kind of came to the inclusion movement a little bit later. I would like to make a little bit of a shameless plug for Inclusion Nova Scotia. If you haven't heard about us, we're a provincial not-for-profit that works to advance the full and meaningful inclusion of individuals with intellectual disabilities and their families in every aspect of community life. We're really happy to be working very much in tandem, lockstep, and cooperation with the Department of Opportunities and Social Development on the rollout of the remedy. There are Inclusion Nova Scotia board members and paid staff at all locations across Nova Scotia right now. Inclusion Nova Scotia, my connection with them changed my life and changed my family's life. So I want to tell you a bit about our journey, about what Peter's doing right now and what our hopes are for individualized planning and individualized funding. But first I want to kind of introduce you to Peter. So this is Peter, my son. He's funny, he's smart, wicked sense of humor. He's thoughtful. He loves words and numbers. He loves music, heavily influenced by my musical taste, and he loves being in a room when other people are singing. He really enjoys nature, especially the beach, and he really truly appreciates the beauty in nature. He plays soccer, basketball, he bowls, he swims. He really enjoys being busy and productive and being alongside other people who are doing the same task as he is. He loves doing puzzles with others, and he is addicted to Wii Sports. Anyone got an extra console kicking around? We go through a few. Peter also has autism, intellectual disability, communication disorder, ADHD, and seizure disorder. His resume is much longer than mine. He will always need support, and he is constantly learning and growing, and I believe he will for his whole life. Peter left the school system in June at 22, which you may connect the dots, is also when I left my job. I don't need to tell the family members in all of our rooms that parenting a child with a disability is quite a journey. Steep learning curve from the moment you suspect a diagnosis, get the diagnosis, and then navigate your way through uncharted territories. Sometimes we're invisible, misunderstood. Sometimes we feel judged, and we feel isolated, and we do our best. You know, like I do, that there's a widening gap that happens between families of children with disabilities and the families of children without disabilities. Those gaps get wider at an exponential rate when our children hit junior high school and then go on through high school. My advocacy efforts were mostly informed by the advice from other families of children with disabilities, school personnel, and the medical system. I hadn't yet connected with Inclusion Nova Scotia. And then we get to high school. Haven't you started planning for transition yet? If you are a parent, a family member of a person with a disability, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the cliff after high school. We were quickly going towards the cliff. And so we started the job of looking at opportunities of what was going to happen for Peter after he left school. And all the things that were being presented to us by those school personnel and the medical system were day programs, sheltered workshops, years-long waiting lists for the day programs, waiting lists for programs that had no retirement age. very therapy-based programming that were protective, segregated, congregated, limiting, and not what we imagined for Peter. Because I had become connected to Inclusion Nova Scotia, our family was beginning to understand that we could actually maybe dream a dream with Peter that was different from the life that was being presented to us, a life that was other than programs. We always had the belief and hope that there has got to be something more. And almost 2 years ago, on April 26, 2023, the Human Rights Remedy was released in Nova Scotia. And along with that, everything you're hearing about individualized funding, which I view as an opportunity for individualized planning. So here we are, planning for a very different future for our son, one that felt right for us. It's a future that's rooted in our deep belief that Peter belongs in community, in his community, not a community that's defined by the fact that he has a disability. We believe that he can learn and work in his community, that he has a right to and a need for genuine relationships, love, and a sense of purpose, that he can, with the right supports, dream of and plan for living an ordinary life, just like his older brothers. So what will that look like? And how will it be different from the model that has existed in Nova Scotia so far? Well, it puts Peter, with the support of his family and friends, in the driver's seat. No longer will he be placed like a game piece somewhere because his name came up on a wait list for a spot in a segregated program or a bed in a group home. Individualized planning means that Peter will have the same access to the opportunities that his brothers have to lead regular, fulfilled lives. This could include maybe having a job, enjoying a hobby or a sport, traveling, making friends, maybe finding a soulmate, having a real home of his own and of his own choosing, and contributing in a meaningful way to his community. It means trying new things, probably making mistakes, picking himself up, and trying again, just like his brothers. These are the common building blocks for life for most Nova Scotians, and Peter's dreams and aspirations should be no different because he lives with a disability. It means that his voice and opinion matter. It means that we can find and hire the kinds of supports that work for Peter and which align with his hopes and dreams, and that don't mean that he has to limit his hopes and dreams or the very essence of who he is in order to fit into a setting. So what is Peter doing right now? He does volunteer work in the community. He takes part in physical activity and sports in his local community center, and he chooses activities that he enjoys and that he's good at. We use his Flex at Home funding to hire a pretty amazing team of support workers who are a good fit for him and for our family. He's starting to contribute to our household by doing small tasks like tidying up after himself and becoming more independent. And like his brothers, that will take time. His life is not limited to programs and places that are only for people with disabilities. It is not perfect and it's not easy. I can tell you that just when we get onto a good glide, something goes wrong. We hit bumps and hurdles almost regularly, but we know without a doubt that this is the path for him and for us, and it's the only way that he will, like his brothers, be able to live his own authentic life. So what are our hopes for the future? Like with his two older brothers, we don't know what the future will bring, what interests he will develop, or what opportunities will present themselves to him, but we know that he will have the supports to allow him to try new things, discover his own gifts and talents, bring those gifts and talents to his community, and we hope so much that by being in community, he will develop real, meaningful connections and relationships. Individualized planning will involve a circle of support for his whole life. The circle of support will be a combination of people with whom he has those authentic relationships and also paid staff. And while the people in his circle of support will change over time, as they naturally do for all of us, Peter himself will always be at the center. For now, he lives and will continue living with us as we figure out what his days will be like, and that is not really that different from many of his age-level 22-year-old peers. Long-term, with the help of individualized funding, our goal is that he will live in a home of his own and of his own choosing, where he gets to make his own house rules, where he can play Wii, although we might need to start an underground pipeline for old Wii consoles, and he'll do puzzles that he chooses to do when he chooses to do them. Maybe there'll be a basketball net in front of the home, and he'll be able to listen to his own music. It's my hope that his life, his existence, will not be a problem to be solved, but very simply a good life to be lived. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing how individualized funding will make a difference in Peter's life, in your family's life, and what the possibilities are. So now we're going to take some time for people to talk again together in small groups like we did. You might have some questions about individualized funding. It is a new approach and a new way of doing things. So we're just going to take 20 minutes, time to chat, break into groups, and then we'll get back together for the final section of the conference. Thank you.